Ohio State versus Clemson seems to be the most anticipated matchup of the two college football playoff games, as this game is a clash of two college football juggernauts, or at least it's anticipated as such, and for good reason, as both teams come into the game with a 13-0 record, and both teams have deservingly received high praise. For Clemson, they come into the game with the number 1 rated scoring defense, and Ohio State is right behind them at number 3. Clemson's defense averaged 10.6 points allowed per game to Ohio State's 12.5. Clemson also comes into the game with the number 1 rated total defense, but Ohio State is getting right behind them at number 2, as the Clemson Tigers allowed 244.7 yards per game to Ohio State's 247.6. Then when we take a look at the offensive side, the roles swap, as Ohio State comes into the game with the number 1 scoring offense, and the Clemson Tigers are number 4. The Buckeyes averaged 48.7 points per game, and the Tigers averaged 46.5. But when you take a look at total offense, it's a different story, as the Tigers come into the game ahead of the Buckeyes with a 3rd-ranked offense, and Ohio State comes in at 5th. The Tigers averaged 547.7 yards per game, and Ohio State averaged 531. But both teams also come into the game with a claim to be considered the best team in the nation. For Ohio State, when you take a look at their resume, not only were they dominant all season, both offensively and defensively, but they also did it against the toughest competition, as they defeated 5 top 25 teams this year, according to the College Football Selection Committee. And for Clemson, not only were they dominant all season, but they are also the reigning defending national champions, who carry a 28-game winning streak coming into the game. But the Buckeyes are carrying a winning streak of their own, as Ohio State's first-year head coach Ryan Day is currently undefeated in his tenure with a 16-0 record. Now historically, as most people know, Clemson holds a 3-0 record against Ohio State all time, and while people may think that has no significance coming into this matchup, there are a few noteworthy points that should be brought up, with the first one being, in their last meeting in the 2016 college football playoffs, Clemson beat Ohio State 31-0 that year in the college football semifinals, and that is a likely motivating factor for both teams. In fact, I can almost guarantee that it is, because not only do both teams care about their legacies, but also, while the rosters are largely different for both teams, there are still 21 players from that 2016 team on Ohio State's current roster, and for Clemson, there are still 23 players from that 2016 roster on their current team. And while none of those players were starters, they still have that game in the front of their minds going into these playoffs. And the other players on the roster are also well aware, as it was one of the first things that Clemson quarterback Trevor Lawrence brought up during his interview on ESPN immediately following the college football playoff seeding. I'm sure that Ohio State players have had a similar discussion in their locker room. And secondly, while there's a lot of turnover in college football when it comes to rosters, as it's typically a 3 to 5 year window, the same is often true for coaches, as the best assistants tend to ascend up the ranks rather quickly, which is why Clemson is such an anomaly in the college football world. In college football, a coaching staff has to be as close as family, because they spend so many hours working together all year round, from recruiting to coaching to dealing with players on a personal level, and at Clemson, members of that family rarely stray. And this is something that both coaches Nick Saban and Urban Meyer have talked about, because when head coaches hire assistants, they look to hire the best. And if you have the best, they're more likely to leave to become head coaches themselves, leaving you to hire someone else who may not be as good. And with that, I want to show you these graphics. This is Ohio State's coaching staff from 2013, the first time that Ohio State and Clemson met in a bowl game this decade. This was Urban Meyer's first coaching staff he assembled after he was hired in 2012. And this was Clemson's coaching staff in 2013, and Dabo Swinney's 6th year with the program. And the Tigers ended up winning that game 40-35 in a very close matchup. But Ohio State ended up winning the first ever college football national championship the following year after only a few coaching switches, which strengthened them overall. Now let's take a look at their next meeting in 2016. This was Ohio State's coaching staff. There were 5 new coaches, and of note, Ohio State's offensive and defensive coordinator from their national championship team in 2014 had already left by 2016. And here's Clemson's 2016 coaching staff. They had only lost 1 assistant during that same time span, to which they simply hired the next man up on their staff. And Clemson went on to beat Ohio State 31-0 that year in the college football semifinals, which leads us to 2019. And this is Ohio State's current coaching staff. Not a single coach from that original group in 2013, with the exception of the sports performance coach, Mickey Marotti, is still on the staff, including head coach Urban Meyer. But with Clemson, this is what their current staff looks like. They only lost 1 assistant coach between 2016 and 2019, but added 2 new assistants because new rules allow teams to have larger coaching staffs. And also with that, here's a list of the coaching turnover for both teams since 2013. So with Clemson, you know what you're going to get. They have a championship caliber coaching staff who's consistently made it to the college football playoff with a couple national title wins in recent years. And that continuity in the staff is why right now, Clemson has overtaken Alabama as college football's most consistent program. But for Ohio State, you have an unknown in that regard. But there is something to be said for assistants who are good enough to become head coaches. Like for one, if your assistant goes to the NFL, your team might be looked at as a team with NFL caliber training. And two, other top assistants will want to come in and work with you. And that's what Urban Meyer got in Ryan Day, a top assistant good enough to become a head coach. And Urban Meyer was so concerned with Ryan Day leaving the program that he decided to step down from head coach and allow Ryan Day to take over. As he said in one of his most recent interviews with Colin Cowherd, stating that he took a page from Bob Stoops' playbook, who stepped down so that Lincoln Riley could take over the Oklahoma program. That's how much Urban Meyer believes in Ryan Day. And that means a lot coming from a top 5 college football coach all time. And Day has proven it right so far, as this Ohio State squad, both offensively and defensively, ranks higher statistically than any Urban Meyer-led team during his tenure at the school. But Day still has not coached in a game of this magnitude, which leads us to the current matchup, where we have Ohio State ranked 2nd and Clemson ranked 3rd, according to the College Football Selection Committee, which gives the impression of 2 evenly matched teams. But it goes even further than that. While betting odds favor Clemson by 2 points, Advanced Metrics, FPI, favors Ohio State to win it all. So which is more likely to be right, Vegas or math? It's a toss-up. And when you look at the rosters, one thing I like to do is go to 24/7 Recruiting because it compiles all the recruiting services rankings into one. And when you look at the 2019 Talent Composite, which is the recruiting ranking of all the team's current players, Ohio State looks to have a significant edge, as they come into the game ranked 2nd, right behind Alabama. Meanwhile, Clemson is ranked 9th overall, which is an interesting factoid, but it doesn't tell the whole story. Because for one, recruiting rankings can be wrong. It's not an exact science. But also, because coaches often recruit to their philosophies, not just recruiting rankings. But thirdly, the most talented teams don't always win. For instance, during Ohio State and Clemson's last meeting in 2016, while the Tigers won the game 31-0, it was Ohio State who had the better roster. And once again, first, I'll go to 24/7 to prove that case, as their composite ranking had Ohio State's roster ranked 5th, while Clemson's roster was ranked 9th overall. But also, those results showed up in the NFL, as the Buckeyes currently have 23 players, including 2 Pro Bowlers and 15 NFL starters from that 2016 roster. As for Clemson's 2016 team, they currently have 15 players in the NFL, including 1 Pro Bowler and 7 starters, which is a pretty decent margin. But for me, one player really stands out above the rest from the 2016 rosters, and that's quarterback Deshaun Watson, because quarterbacks can typically have the biggest impact on a game. And reports were after the 2016 game that Clemson team felt that Buckeyes quarterback JT Barrett's limitations as a passer is what helped them stifle the Buckeyes defense. Now granted, as I said before, Ohio State lost 5 key assistants from their national championship team, including their offensive and defensive coordinator, and also there were several scoring opportunities for the Buckeyes that they just didn't capitalize on early in the game. But still, when 2 similarly talented teams face off, seeking matchups and finding exploits is what separates a win from a loss. And just like 2016, that's what these teams will look to do in this upcoming matchup. And we have some tremendous matchups in this game. And first of all, I want to start with the heavyweight matchup, and that's Clemson's wide receivers versus Ohio State's secondary. And Clemson's receivers are led by T. Higgins, a 6'4" wide receiver who had 52 receptions, over 1,000 receiving yards, and 13 tutties this season, who's projected to be a first-round pick. Alongside him is another outstanding receiver and sophomore Justin Ross, who himself is projected to be a first-round pick in 2021, with Amir Rodgers in the slot and DeAndre Overton capping off their 4 wide sets. And one thing that Clemson is known for is tall receivers, because they love those 50-50 balls. And every receiver in that 4-man set, with the exception of Rodgers, their slot receiver, is listed at 6'4". But they're up against the most elite secondary they've faced all year, as every cornerback in Ohio State's starting lineup has a first or second round grade, and it's led by consensus top 10 pick Jeffrey Okudah, a 6'1" cornerback out of Texas, and the #1 corner in his recruiting class. But on the other side is Shaun Wade, who's also 6'1" and was the second-ranked corner in that same class. And along with them is Damon Damon Arnett, a 6-foot corner who also has a real shot at being drafted in the first round of this year's draft. And for me, this is the number one matchup I'm looking forward to in this game, because on both sides of the ball, these are the position groups with the highest rated grades: Clemson's receivers versus Ohio State's secondary. And with this game, I expect a lot of 50-50 balls and crossing patterns to make a major impact, because crossing patterns killed Ohio State's secondary in their first half in the Big Ten Championship game until they switched to zone coverage, which I expect Ohio State to run in this game as well. Not just because of crossing patterns, but also because quarterback Trevor Lawrence can flat out run. Coach Dabo Swinney is on record saying that Trevor Lawrence is a better version of Deshaun Watson, which will be a big challenge for this Ohio State defense. But in zone coverage, the defensive backfield can keep an eye on the quarterback. But given enough time, Trevor Lawrence will pick his own defense apart, which is why the Buckeyes will have to switch up their coverages. But that concern also leads to the second most intriguing matchup, and that's Clemson's offensive line versus Ohio State's defensive line. And Ohio State's defensive line is led by Ben Derrick Award winner Chase Young, who is also one of 4 defensive linemen to ever be nominated for the Heisman Trophy. And Chase Young is projected as the number 1 player in the upcoming NFL draft and the top 2 pick on every board. And he comes into the game with 16.5 sacks, and that's with him missing 2 games due to suspension. But it's not just him. This Buckeye defensive line is full of stud players, as their defense has averaged the 3rd most sacks this season, and they have several 4- and 5-star players across the board whose number 1 job will be to get to Trevor Lawrence and make him uncomfortable all night, which is why the team likes to move Chase Young around so that teams don't know where he's going to line up. But they're up against Clemson's offensive line, a veteran group full of seniors who played in a national championship game last year against another top-tier defensive line in Alabama. And the only non-returning starter on their offensive line is sophomore Carmen Jackson, who could potentially be a top draft pick in the coming years. And this Clemson offensive line gave up the 5th fewest sacks this season, averaging about 1 per game. So both group of players come into this game with their reputation on the line. But if the Ohio State defensive line gets into the backfield too frequently or gets too aggressive, expect running back Travis Etienne to slow them down in the screen game. And this matchup is the key exploit that this Clemson offense will look for in this game: their running backs and tight ends against Ohio State's linebackers. Now, Ohio State's linebacker group just might be the most talented group that the Tigers have faced all year, but they are considered the weakest group on Ohio State's defense. And one thing that Clemson's offense will surely do is try to get ETN along with their wide receivers and tight ends in space against Ohio State's linebackers to test their ability to defend. Now let's move to the other side of the ball and take a look at Ohio State's matchups. And for me, the key matchup on this side of the ball is Ohio State's offensive line versus Clemson's defensive line, because there is no good time to match up against Clemson's defensive line. Let's get that straight, but this isn't the worst time, because I know that Clemson has been hearing it all year, and yet their defensive stats this year are better than last year. But Clemson lost a lot of great talent on that defensive line in the NFL draft last year. In fact, 3 of their defensive linemen were drafted in the 1st round, and the other was drafted in the 4th. And all of those players were also on that 2016 team. And to put it lightly, that kind of talent is just hard to replace. But on the other side of those departures, the group of defensive linemen that Clemson has coming in next year is like anything I have ever seen before. I'm borderline ready to call it unfair, because I want you to take a look at this. Clemson next year is expected to bring in 3 of the top 5 players in the country, all on the defensive line, and the 4th in the top 25. Then the last one they're bringing in is in the top 100. So next year, Clemson is bringing in 5 of the top 16 defensive linemen, including 3 which are considered top 5 players regardless of position, into their program. So what I'm saying is, if you're going to match up well with Clemson's defensive line, it's either this time or no time, because the cavalry is coming. And I believe that Ohio State's number 1 game plan coming into this game will be to establish the line of scrimmage and get the running game going. And Clemson's defensive line is on the smaller side compared to years past, and Ohio State's big offensive linemen will look to take advantage of that. But that's only one part of the run game, and the next half falls on Ohio State's running back J.K. Dobbins, who had an excellent season and was nearing a Heisman nomination himself. But he's up against Clemson's linebacker unit led by consensus top 10 pick Isaiah Simmons. But J.K. Dobbins is a load to bring down, and he's very good running in space. But Isaiah Simmons is unlike anything he's ever seen on the opposing side of the field. Simmons can do it all. He's as big as a defensive end, but he runs like a defensive back. He leads the Tigers in tackles, sacks, and is tied for 2nd place in interceptions. And the Tigers like to use him all over the field to wreak havoc. And so, if Dobbins can make it through the front line, he will have Simmons and the rest of Clemson's linebacker core to contend with if he wants to turn short gains into long ones. And then we have the final matchup for Ohio State, which is Justin Fields versus the entire Clemson defense. Now, Justin Fields is a special player. In fact, if not for Joe Burrow's incredible season, it would be him and Chase Young getting all the attention in the Heisman race. He runs a sub 4.4 40 and he throws a deadly accurate deep ball. And he's up against the best defense he has ever faced. This Clemson defense is fundamentally sound, and schematically, they are so skilled at disguising their defensive coverages that on offense, it's hard to tell what your assignments are. And really, this matchup is going to be a matchup of the minds with Brent Venables' defense versus Ryan Day and Justin Fields' offense. Brent Venables of Clemson is far and wide viewed as the premier defensive play caller in college football today. His resume speaks for itself, but Ryan Day was so skilled as an offensive mind that Urban Meyer felt comfortable stepping down from Ohio State. And if Ryan Day has a fully healthy Justin Fields at his disposal, both Ohio State's offense and Clemson's defense will be fully stressed for the entire game. And the winner of this matchup will go a long way toward deciding who will win this game. And with that being said, I want to quickly go through the side-by-side position face-offs. First, the quarterback position, Trevor Lawrence versus Justin Fields. Lawrence was the number 1 rated quarterback and player in the 2018 class, but Fields was right behind him at number 2 in both regards. They are both from Georgia, and their schools were 30 minutes apart, but they never faced each other on the field. However, during the Elite 11 tournament, Fields did win the MVP over Trevor Lawrence. For their biggest flaws, I'd say Fields at times holds onto the ball way too long. And for Lawrence, sometimes he has so much trust in his abilities that he makes careless throws. And I have to say, I have never seen a player with as much confidence in himself as Lawrence. But Fields is also a generational talent who can do it all. Obviously, Lawrence has already won a national title, while Fields has not. And also, Ohio State has zero depth at the quarterback position. Everyone knows about Joe Burrow's leaving for LSU, but every other scholarship quarterback on Ohio State's roster left through the transfer portal as well. Meanwhile, Lawrence still has a solid backup behind him. Advantage Clemson. Running back. There's really nothing to be said here. They're very similar talents, and both running back groups have solid but not great depth behind them. Their career numbers are similar. Etienne has better yards per carry, but Dobbins probably played the tougher competition. Both running backs have second-round grades, so this is a draw. Wide receiver. Ohio State has a talented group of veteran and youngsters, but Clemson's group is more proven and projected higher. I think Ohio State has better depth and will also be tough to stop, but advantage goes to Clemson. Offensive line. Ohio State has a solid group and has an anchor and second-team All-American Wyatt Davis at guard, but they've given up more sacks than Clemson's offensive line this year. Clemson also has an anchor and first-team All-American John Simpson, and this Clemson offensive line has already proven themselves against Alabama in the national title game last year. Advantage Clemson. Defensive line, everyone knows the answer here. Ohio State has Chase Young. Advantage Ohio State. Linebacker, same thing here. Clemson has Isaiah Simmons. The answer is Clemson. Secondary. I've already gone over how highly touted Ohio State's secondary is. Clemson has a solid secondary as well, but I have to give the advantage to Ohio State. Special teams. Ohio State's kicker's been more consistent. Neither punter's gotten a lot of work, and I'll give Clemson the head and kick and punt return. But overall, special teams is a wild card, and I'm saying it's a draw. Coaching. No debate, it's Clemson. They're proven. Ohio State's had a great season. They're full of brilliant minds, but they haven't won the big one yet. But again, with overall talent, Ohio State may still have the edge, as they have 5 Walter Camp All-Americans, the most of any school this season, with 2 on the first team and 3 on the second team. While Clemson has 3 total All-Americans, with 2 on the first team and 1 on the second team. Also, when projecting for the draft, Ohio State's projected to have at least 8 players drafted with a max of 12, while Clemson's projected to have 5 players drafted with a max of 7. And finally, the result of this game will carry over into the future. Now, there's a lot more than winning and losing in bowl games when it comes to recruiting decisions like proximity and comfort with the staff, but the games also matter. Carmen Jackson, the top recruit from Ohio, said as much when he decided to go to Clemson after the 2016 game, with the coaching continuity at Clemson also playing a major factor. And both teams' 2020 recruiting classes are mostly set, but I do have one thing of note. Ohio State is strongly pursuing the number 2 quarterback prospect in the country in CJ Stroud, and he's projected to commit with Ohio State. And with Clemson currently holding the commitment of the number 1 quarterback in the class, we can see a similar storyline to the Justin Fields, Trevor Lawrence story if these teams were to meet again in the future. But 2021, however, is a different story, and there are currently 11 major recruiting battles going on between these 2 schools. Here's a list of the top prospects that both teams are pursuing according to 24/7 Sports. And I can tell you, the recruitment of the running back position holds special importance at Ohio State because they lack depth at that position and have missed out on key prospects for the last couple of years. But Clemson also lacks great depth at that position, although they were able to secure the commitment of the third-ranked running back from the 2020 class. So it may not be as much of a position of urgency for them. But also the number one player in the country, Corey Foreman. Although he's projected to commit to USC, the question mark at the coaching position could sway his decision, and both Ohio State and Clemson are known for producing top-tier defensive linemen. Ohio State with the Bosa brothers and Chase Young, and Clemson with Wilkins, Lawrence, and Christian Watkins. So this game could influence these players' decisions, and that's just something to keep in mind while watching the upcoming game. But that's a wrap for my Clemson Ohio State preview, and I hope to get my Oklahoma LSU preview done soon. So be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss out on that. And I'm also going to do a quick preview of all the bowl games, so subscribe to the channel because you don't want to miss that. Now check you out later on You Must Be Out Your Mind. Peace out.